Good morning, everyone. Welcome. This is Angela Coulter, your Consciousness Transformation Ascension Guide, originator of Trinity Energy Progression, bringing you this week's Living the Shift. And today we're talking about. I got the announcement out sort of late because it's just been that kind of week. But anyway, there's been a lot of talk that I've had this past week or so on twin flames, on star beings. If you don't, if you haven't listened to my Ascended World podcast with Sarah C. Gavagnoni, we did one on Monday called Connecting to Ourselves Through the Multiverse, which will give you a lot more background on what I'm going to talk about today. But this was just a guidance on honing in on this particular topic because it tends to be a hot topic, twin flames and star beings. So why not combine them together, right? But what I want to talk about is some guidance, some insights that I got in from meditation like a week ago, where I was sitting there and I was sitting there and I was out of my hammock, and behind my house there's we have terracing because it goes downhill into there's woods, and then there's park, whatever. So I have a hammock beneath the terracing, so it's very, very nature, beautiful place to meditate when the weather's just right. And so I was doing that, and on this particular day, as soon as I tuned in, it's like I could just feel this presence everywhere, all over the place. And I talk about this Monday in the podcast with Sarah. And so the whole thing was, I realized that the presence was all of these star beings. And part of the communications that I had in connecting with them had to do with, changing our perspective, because we're so myopic and so centric on the density that we're embodying here on Earth as the pieces of Earth, this part of our consciousness, that we forget the entire perspective of the rest, right? And I've talked about that in the past. I've talked about how we do oh crud, I just totally lost my train of how we're a much smaller piece of a very big picture. So this is like a little piece of a much larger project. So we have project teams, right? My understanding, and then there's a project team that manages the whole production of Earth. Right now, it's funny because in a very comical way, one of my favorite books in the world is Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Doug Adams. And if you haven't read it, it's a riot and it's fun and it brings a different perspective to a lot of things. But it's funny how it sort of points out how different planets they have they were created to have a purpose on much bigger scope. And so it's funny because in so many respects, I think that was written in the 60s, I want to say, that book. But it is so perfect because it gives you, it helps to sway and shift and warp our perspective to be something bigger than ourselves, right? And also in the movies, the Men in Black movies, they do the same thing, right? Especially the first one, there's the whole universe and the marble, all that kind of stuff. And then the locker, right, in the train station. So, and I don't have my phone sitting here with me, so FYI, if you're putting in comments, I don't see them right now. I don't know why it's not coming up today. I might have to get up and go get my phone, which I might just do. But anyway, yeah, hold that thought for a second, and I'm going to run over here and get my phone, because sometimes I can see the comments on my phone and not on the screen, which is very odd. But anyway, so it gives us a different perspective on how to see ourselves within the multiverse, because quite honestly, we are so closed off in terms of and that's what we wanted to do in terms of our existence here and density and everything else. But now it's time for us to shift that. Okay, here we go. I just do this so I can see comments. Here we go. Bloop. Okay. So yeah, I'm in a different spot today, and I'm a little darker because I'm in a kitchen in my basement. It's my daughter's apartment. So that So, but the overhead fluorescents were really bright and actually like bleached everything out. So I turned the light off and going by daylight, but then that sort of made this sort of odd. So excuse the little bit of darkness for today in terms of the image. But anyhow, I digress. Back to the star being thing. So, the perspective is this. We think, oh, look at the Bible and everything else. So the earth is the center of the multiverse. It is absolutely not. It is a very small, tiny piece of a much bigger project. And so you can feel it insignificant, but at the same time, when we work in consciousness, we work in looking at things from a much bigger perspective of saying, okay, so concentric-wise, my consciousness gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And then, as part of the whole divine consciousness or the universe or source or God or whatever, I'm all of that. And all of that's within me, right? So we talk about that in consciousness a lot. And we talk it and talk it and talk it and talk it and talk it. And yet we still don't have that perspective beyond here. So we talk about, we're incarnated here. Excuse me. We're incarnated here. And everything we think of in our mind, which is ego-based from here, the ego here on earth, we expand it out to, like from here, like this is our base point. Well, the thing that I was communicating with the star beings out in the woods was about looking at the perspective of, okay, so we talk about in astrology how, the planets affect us, the inner workings, and the constellations affect us. Really, they don't. It's just really what we do, and I talk about this all the time. It's what we have inside of us that reflects back to us. The way I work and understand and work with others is everything inside of us is what is around us reflecting back to us. So that includes the constellations and the stars. And each of the stars has their own energy that they reflect back to us. Just like our sun is a star, and we actually have an energy that we reflect back to others in form in other ways in other parts of the multiverse. So the thing is, we only think of it in one direction. We never think of it in all directions. So I was looking at that, and then I was also like looking at the understanding of, well, many of us have memories, or we have dreams. I'm going to use a lot of air quotes here. We have memories, or we have dreams about going to being in a different like body, different form, different part of the universe. We've seen ourselves in other civilizations, in past life regressions, and all kind of stuff. So here's the thing, right? So what I was looking at after I looked at the stars from a different perspective was, what about, like our full consciousness, when we decide to embody a small, tiny piece of our consciousness here, of course, it's just a tiny piece of our consciousness. And part of what we're working on in say ascension practice, enlightenment practice, is coming into the remembrance and pulling out the partitions that we cut off to forget that we're all of that and all of this, so that we could see that reflection back to us, right? I'm doing this in a very accelerated manner so I could get to the point. But when we do that, but we are still thinking very human-centric. We're still thinking very, almost ant-centric in terms of from here outwards, and that everything is here. And if we are so big and we have such a huge amount of consciousness, even within our individual souls, why would we just embody here? And there's no linearity out there in the ethers. We create time and space for measurement and separation and duality and all that kind of stuff, right? So the thing is, and what came to me and looking at all this, and it was quite an expanded purview of the universe, was, well, if I'm taking a piece of my consciousness and I embody it here right now, there's nothing that says I'm not taking from my I am self, right? My soul level, top of the soul level thing. There's nothing that's saying that I'm not taking a part of myself and embodying it or putting it in form in other galaxies, in other planets, in other places. all throughout the multiverse. There's no reason for me not to do that. Now, eventually we get to the biggest part of consciousness. It means it's all me. That's all just all me and as the divine, splitting into all these different bajillions of facets and multiverses and so many dimensions and all kinds of stuff, right? And forms. And so then we can, all right, so then why wouldn't I do that if I just take it to a smaller piece of like my universe, right? Which is then my soul. And it's interesting because then I was like, oh yeah, I know there are some people I talk about, well, not everybody has a soul. Well, it's not that every individual is not a full soul. It's that we are a piece of like the bigger soul that we are, the I am, and it's all how you want to see it, right? That's my understanding. So, maybe the perception and understanding is that when you see those or have those dreams or have those meditations or like, and it's different. Like people ask me, how do I know when something is true versus something I'm making up? Well, we'll make up everything anyway. It's the entire universe of creation. But there's this feeling and you're like, oh, this felt so vivid. It felt so real. It feels so actual and so me and so natural, right? When you hit on it. So when we look at that and saying, okay, so then there's parts of me in form in other parts of the multiverse, right? And that's sort of a little bit mind-blowing, right? To think, well, but then why not? And so part of what, Sarah and I talked about on Monday was, accessing those selves through the multiverse. And that's the title of Monday's podcast, was connecting to ourselves through the universe, the multiverse or whatever. And so it's like this. Let's think about that. I was like, so what would happen when you would come face to face with yourself? Think about that. What would happen if you did? So it's easier to perceive us in different forms and coming face to face with ourselves. I mean, it is a little bit mind-blowing, a little bit mind-twisting, right? So we look at things like, okay, what if we came face to face with ourselves in a different form? So who's to say that the beings that I was communicating with were not just me? Because they were essentially, at some level, you keep on going out in consciousness, right? In terms of including that concentricity, right? And it's easier then for us to take a moment and say, okay, so if I came across this being that said it was me, and I would know because I could feel it once I got past the, idea of it's so different than me and all this kind of stuff and blah, 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 but it's really, something felt really connected, right? Well, so then what if we take part of ourself and instead of putting it all through, but in addition to having it all throughout the multiverse, we have another part of ourself that we embody in a different place, in a different way, in the same space and time as this one. That was some clarity I got on what twin flames sort of are, right? Many have asked me, and I've worked with many over the years on twin flame stuff, and I've had the experience of myself with my own, and it's a very unique experience, and I've gotten all of these understandings underneath it, and I've asked for clarity from my higher self. I'm like, okay, so what is really the purpose, or what is it, or what really is this, right? Because again, we're saying, oh, it's this, one other part of ourselves that we split, and we're not whole without it, or like there's this romanticism around it, and it's not, by the way, people think it's supposed to be a romantic relationship. It's really not, because I know many people who are not, like there are sisters I know, there are friends I know, there's mother-daughters, father-daughters, all kinds of combinations of individuals who have recognized their twin flame in another that, that aren't of a romantic nature. But it's a very unique kind of combination, because when you tend to meet your twin flame, it sets you off on a whole path of awakening, right? From this body, and B, it also helps you to accelerate your awareness of yourself in ways that are more often uncomfortable than not, right? Because because as we've described it in the past, right, the twin flames are somebody else who's basically here with the exact same frequency as you. So there is this connection that you have that you recognize as spark. And that's how that recognition allows to help the awakening, because it's that spark of that frequency that you have inside of you that you're not used to seeing outside of you from this particular perception of density, right? And so when it sparks off that recognition, there is often, most often, there is a period, if not a continuous, push-pull of a connection, because the person can get so sort of inside of you that it's like they could just step inside and wrap you around them in a blanket, because it's like you can't hide yourself from them, essentially, and that anything within you that's a crumb that has to do with worthiness for yourself and all that kind of stuff, that will come up, because it's like looking in a mirror without any filters, right? And the longer you do it, the more apparent it becomes. I've had these discussions about twin flames before. There's like tons, there's a lot out there, and there's a lot that I've even talked about. But here's the thing. When we put it in the perspective of saying, okay, well, like I'm this big, huge soul, like even just at the I am level, and of course why would I not take form in all these other places simultaneously? It doesn't mean I have to do it in a linear fashion. There is no linearity outside of this space here. So if I take form in other parts of the multiverse, why would I not take the opportunity on occasion to take form as well in the same space and time as I'm taking form, in a body here on Earth, right? So are there rules against it? No, I think there are guidelines. I don't like talking about rules and stuff, because we can always break the rules because we made them. But the thing is to say, okay, so if that's the case, then it's simply just another piece of ourselves that's, embodied, that when we see or meet or touch in some way, it's that spark of that remembrance. It's a spark of remembrance that helps us to come back to the being that we are in wholeness versus in separation and duality. And so there are purposes for doing that. There's purposes for us doing that on our journeys. We don't, for whatever reason, I know we don't typically do it all that often, because it's like, well, we can set these set of lessons this way. I don't know. I don't even know why, because my understanding is we don't do it all that often. Mostly because we didn't want to remember before, or for a long period of time. And it really does accelerate our remembrance. But the thing is, to come into that recognition within ourselves, to have that representation of a twin flame in front of us, is to totally remind ourselves about the divine infinite being that we are. And if we are not in the place where we're ready to accept that within ourselves, then the ego will project it onto that person. And that's why it becomes a push-pull thing, right? We'll judge that person, they'll judge us, like it's this whole thing. But what if it's just you looking at you, and you've given yourself the gift of forgetfulness and looking at it from a different body, looking at yourself from a different body in this form and separation, and within this whole experience of judgment and exclusion and stuff like that, right? And so when it's time for us to complete our cycle of all this forgetfulness, then my understanding is that's when we decide to sort of cross paths a lot of times here, because it's sort of, and I'm talking about here on Earth, because this, I understand, is one of the heaviest, most separate experiences. Not the heaviest, my understanding is, but one of the heaviest separate duality-based experiences. So anyway, this is still coming in, and I wanted to get in and talk, because I talked a bit about it Monday on Ascended World with Sarah. We talked about, connecting in and pulling out the partitions with all of those pieces of us. In my practice, Trinity Energy Progression, we have a thing about twin flames, and to connect in and to remove the partitions between us and the twin flame to remember our wholeness. But it's like, this is taking it like 50 more steps of saying, let's take out the partition between us and our twin flame, what we call our twin flame here, And there are many I know, by the way, who've gotten guidance that their twin flame, or somebody, a being appears to them from another part of the multiverse or whatever, and that they are presenting themselves as a twin flame. And then people have asked me, can you have more than one? It's like, of course, if you can have one, you can have, you can split ourselves in how many ways we want. Ultimately, once we get comfortable with that and remember that, we go into bigger, much bigger levels of consciousness to say we're all the same, we're all twin flames, we're all parts of the same consciousness. So then, but it's like babies, it's like in between steps to get there. So there's a lot of things to consider. But the thing is with the star beings, it's like, okay, so maybe that's what would attract them to you specifically, would be it's just another aspect of you showing itself to you. And if we're not in that place yet of knowing that it's all us anyway, the similarity of the frequency would, of course, attract you to any being, any form that you have taken in any part of the multiverse, as well as probably what's the word? Push away. Good grief. Pull and push. Repulse. That's it. Repulse and attract at the same time. So, I'm still like, there's a lot of, why questions that go along with this. I have a lot of people that ask me why, and I'm like, well, the thing isn't to really ask why, it's to ask, what's it here? What is it here for me to see? Because it's individual for every one of us, or anybody who does have it. And that's why some people have one, have what they call twin flame, and some people don't. There might be a particular energy of a pair that we create, and maybe we split ourselves even further to experience things in an even different way here on Earth. Yeah, that stuff is still coming in. It continues to evolve and understanding. But sit with that and think, wow, because of course, why would I just embody myself here? Let me be all over the place. Like I'm in and say, okay, well, many people said, I was teaching somebody how to do a past life regression a while back, and I had them do one on me. And I use quotes because past life is linear, and we just talk about other lives, really. But it takes out these partitions so we can remember other parts or experiences that we've had as individuals, that we've embodied as, right? Whether it's now or another time, another space. But the funniest part is for maybe the last, I want to say 4 or 5 times that I've had somebody do a regression on me, including this time I was training somebody to do it. I would go into another part of the universe, and I would have a really challenging time explaining what I was seeing, because I understood what I was seeing or experiencing, but I didn't have words because it was a completely different way of communicating and a different presence of consciousness and everything else in form. So now it makes a lot of sense. I'm like, oh, well, I was just showing myself other parts of myself, whether it is now, what is now anyway, in all honesty, right? Do we have time across the universe? Not unless we want to create it. There's a lot to think about that, right? This is really sort of an out there kind of topic, but it's really, my understanding is it's really important, which is why I was guided to come back and talk about this in a little more detail today. And also to get more information and to do a great clearing and opening to the other parts of yourself. I would highly recommend you go over to Ascended World and listen or watch Monday's video with Sarah and me talking about all this from that perspective. But as we start to consider these things, it's also part of letting go of this centricity of, I am on Earth and this is the center of the multiverse, to saying, I am on Earth and this is one part of many parts of me that are in form in other parts of the multiverse, all for the purpose of my soul purpose, which I may or may not remember consciously. And at some point, the goal is to have that remembrance. Part of the goal is in raising the vibration is for us to pull out these partitions to remember that across the board, we have this consciousness that is infinitely capable and powerful and creative, so that we then shift the entire vibration, or what I call the note of this planet, to something completely different. As it's part of, again, as I started in the beginning of this, a much bigger project across the multiverse. And we are, those of us who have incarnated here, this part of our consciousness is project manager for this team, project managers in this team. So it's to take the next step to really allow ourselves to embrace this, is for us to get this perspective that's a little wider, to say, okay, I'm here and I'm there. I'm here and I'm in Sirius and I'm in Pleiades and I'm in, Andromeda or Arcturus. I mean, there's in those systems, in those solar systems. Or all of them, none of them, some of them, others beyond that. Why not? It's pulling out our blinders to allow ourselves to see the bigger parts of ourselves and know that we got this. This is such a small part of the bigger game. So your take home this week is, go and watch or listen to Ascended World from Monday. And you can go here. I'm doing this live on Facebook. So you go over to the Ascended World page on Facebook, or you can go to ascendedworld.net and the posting is there, or ascendedworld.podbean.com. On Podbean, we have it too. So, or on iTunes, or on Spotify, Google Play, all those places that we do podcasts. But anyway, and I'm tying them together this week so very closely, because it is very important that we start to really expand on these things. And when we stop being so myopic and so completely, ant level perspective on, what a twin flame can be, and romanticizing it and then getting distracted by it, the thing is to stop and ask, what is it here to show me? And it is maybe to come to a place, to help you come to a place of a new vibration of self-love, self-worth, self-acceptance, and not that you need that person, but it's just a reflection of you to recognize as yourself. So that was a whole lot of mind scrambling stuff, but really important in terms of things that are coming in that are helping to shift our perspective so that we can take the next step, because we got something big around the corner. Many of us feel that and know it, that we haven't even hit the biggest part of whatever these changes are, and it has nothing to do with political elections or a virus or anything else, but these are just manifestations that we've created to hold the space while we do this. And that's why it's so important to go inside, to allow ourselves to expand our consciousness into the remembrance of what we really are. So on that, I'm going to let you go. Small topic this week. We'll see you next time. Thank you for joining me. This is Angela Coulter signing off with this week's Living the Shift. Have a great one.